Hey friendo, Steve here. Welcome back to the channel. So one of the bigger items of interest over the past week or so that's gotten everybody talking in the world of wrestling has, of course, been the Dark Side of the Ring episode on the plane ride from hell. That plane ride that went down back in 2002 during a WWF European tour where a bunch of wrestlers in the WWF got super drunk and did a bunch of bad things. There's been tons of fallout from this episode, including Tommy Dreamer being suspended for now from both his jobs at Impact Wrestling and the Busted Open Sirius XM show. He has released a comment about it. Ric Flair has had an advertising campaign with CarShield put on hold. So who knows where all this stuff is going to land. But in any event, it got a lot of people talking. I've seen comments both on the Going In Raw video and here on Wrestle Juice. People, by and large, I think the sentiment is probably the correct one. Like, hey, man, there's got to be some accountability. Granted, it happened 2 decades ago, but there should be some accountability. I've seen other people on Twitter or even here in the comments or over on Going In Raw, have a different point of view. Say things like, hey, we should all be afraid because, our past is going to catch up with us and something that we did 20 years ago, we're going to get canceled for, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know. I mean, I've got plenty of thoughts about that in terms of, there being a statute of limitations or not. On the idea of accountability, I kind of feel like, if you did something really, really shitty, which seemingly Ric Flair did, it kind of doesn't matter how long it's been. There should be some amount of accountability for it. I mean, look at Bill Cosby and what he did. That being said, I thought, in thinking about that idea, that topic, you have to wonder, okay, well, why wasn't this incident or incidents in general, but focusing specifically on the plane ride from hell, why wasn't it more of a big deal back then? And I think a lot of it has to do with the information that people receive at the time. And these days, it's a lot different because a giant mass of people, social media, will receive a certain amount of information. At this point, in this specific example, Heidi Doyle, the stewardess, the airline attendant that was the victim of Ric Flair, came forward and told her story. And that was something that hadn't really been done before. And so the accountability then comes when everybody receives that information and commiserates and then decides, hey, this isn't cool. Something should probably happen. And then the savvier PR firms and marketing firms observe that, and say, yeah, no, we should probably stop these CarShield commercials. And Impact Wrestling's like, oh, God, Tommy said what? No, he can't be here anymore. So I get the feeling that it's sort of a matter of how the information is disseminated, when and how that happens. And so I thought it would be interesting to see how that information was disseminated back in 2002 when all this stuff happened. And so I went back and I looked at the 2 biggest wrestling newsletters of the time, still to this day, the Pro Wrestling Torch and the the Wrestling Observer newsletter. Both legendary publications. They've been around forever. And I went back to the appropriate episode, issues, I should say. And I've got their write-ups on the plane ride from hell. Before I get started, give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Thought it was just interesting to hear them write it up and the information they had. First up from PWTorch. They said this is the write-up here. This is from 2002. The WWE chartered a plane in Europe for the Raw Cruise Tour, and as usual, on chartered flights, the drinking got out of hand. On commercial flights, wrestlers and staffers must limit their alcohol consumption, but on private chartered flights, they are able to drink away, and many do. Vince McMahon eventually gave everyone a verbal thrashing for their behavior. His words didn't carry as much credibility as they would have had McMahon not gotten into a playful scuffle with Kurt Angle last year on a charter flight himself that resulted in Undertaker choking out Angle from behind on a run-in to save Vince. End quote, really quick. These plane rides were absolutely nuts. hell's going on? Anyways, continuing on. The biggest incident involved X-Pac cutting off Michael Hayes' ponytail on the flight. Hayes was considered to be among the more belligerent and annoying passengers. X-Pac, who doesn't drink, cut off his ponytail while he slept, which received cheers from many other passengers. When Hayes woke up and noticed his missing locks, he cut a promo on Gerald Briscoe, assuming he was the culprit. X-Pac stood up and took credit, at which point Hayes backed down. A sign was taped up at Raw the next night stating auction Freebird ponytail. Proceeds benefit Alcoholics Anonymous. Bradshaw punched Michael Hayes on one of the European flights. When Hayes knuckled his forehead where he had bladed earlier, Hayes has a tradition of playfully punching guys in the forehead after they've gigged. So the Plane Ride from Hell episode framed it as this was the same flight where the Bradshaw-Hayes interaction went down. Incidentally, we'll just pause real quick. In that same episode, same issue of PWTorch, Randy Orton was just debuting, and he was given a write-up. And this sort of dovetails into what this whole thing is about. He says, Hardcore Holly was given the duty of working initiation matches with newcomer Randy Orton. That means that Orton is given a test to see how he reacts to being put through overly stiff matches and determine whether he accepts it and doesn't complain or if he fights back. So far, he's getting positive reviews from wrestlers in the locker room for how he was handling himself. He has a really good look and solid fundamentals, but isn't going to dazzle fans with any spectacular moves. No, the RKO will never dazzle any fans for the next 20 some odd years. I thought that was kind of interesting because it simply speaks to a different era of professional wrestling where these dudes are just basically seeing who can out-tough each other. Like Michael Hayes goes around punching people's wounds that are fresh, and so they bleed again, and so they punch him back, so he goes to sleep. They have literal matches where you see how somebody's going to respond if they're getting stiffed in the ring by a fairly known asshole like Hardcore Holly. It's bizarre that there was such a distinct turning point at some point in the last 20 years. And you can point to any number of times that could have been, with a new class of wrestlers coming in, maybe post wellness policy, post Benoit. I don't know. But it's kind of interesting to see how far the culture has come along in pro wrestling where you don't really hear about that kind of stuff anymore. So anyways, that was the Pro Wrestling Torch's take on the Plane Ride from Hell. The Wrestling Observer had this. So preceding this, he was talking about how Scott Hall had been fired, which was his main takeaway from the Plane Ride from Hell. Incidentally, there is nothing in that PWTorch article about Ric Flair at all. Wrestling Observer does talk about Ric Flair. He says there were numerous problems on the flight back from England's Insurrection pay-per-view, most not even related to Scott Hall. Several believe it is due to Vince not making the trip and wrestlers believing they weren't going to get in trouble because of late discipline has not been taken seriously because of everything Hall's been allowed to get away with. Among the incidents, and while incidents on overseas flights involving wrestlers are not uncommon, the number on this flight made it just about the worst flight anyone could remember. Talks about Dustin Runnels was on the PA singing love songs to his ex-wife, who was terribly uncomfortable. She asked him to stop and he didn't. Jim Ross had to sit Runnels down. No word on the report subsequent from the lawsuit that's been making the way around Twitter about Dustin Runnels' behavior, which also wasn't brought up in Dark Side of the Ring, about him also getting really super inappropriate with one of the flight attendants. This was interesting. The Wrestling Observer says there was also heat on agents Gerald Briscoe and Arn Anderson for how out of hand things got, and the heat on Anderson and Michael Hayes was strong, particularly Anderson, because as an agent, it's his job to keep the boys from getting out of control, and he was more like one of the boys. Flair started to get wild, but eventually calmed down when Ross told him to. That's the only mention of Flair in this entire write-up on the Wrestling Observer. Flair started to get wild, but everything eventually calmed down when Ross told him to. He talks about Kurt Hennig spraying people with shaving cream, kept egging Brock Lesnar into fighting. Lesnar didn't know how to handle it as a newcomer, not wanting to get in trouble, but reportedly was told that if he didn't stand up to him now, he'd get a bad rep in the business. Lesnar took Hennig down in the aisleway, actually more than once, until Fit Finlay told Lesnar to stop. Hennig tried to get him to do it again, but Paul Heyman told Lesnar to ignore it, to no-sell it. Another report said that Lesnar first grabbed him and bulldozed him against the door, and people on the plane freaked because they were afraid the door would open. Meltzer continues, Michael Hayes was out of control, got into either a serious or not serious brawl with Bradshaw, and started cutting wrestling promos on everyone. Hayes tried to halfway pick a fight with Hall, although it was also said Hall had that one coming by his own behavior as well as others, and was generally really nasty. He talks about X-Pac cutting his hair. It says everyone is waiting to see how Vince handles all these situations, although he did immediately make an example out of Hall. Hayes really got chewed out by Vince. Michael Hayes still works there, by the way. Stephanie and Ross at Raw. There was a feeling that as a writer and an agent, he should be leading by example. Undertaker was said to be furious at how out of hand this got. So yeah, this is kind of interesting stuff. Here's another bit about Flair. I'm sorry, I apologize. Flair was causing the Flair scene, which is not unusual as he is a partier and it isn't above him to get almost naked on a non-commercial flight. But he doesn't cause danger to anyone, just causes a scene and gets attention. He's been doing it for years. When told by Ross to stop, he did. There's some more interesting stuff here, kind of. Fact that there isn't more heat on X-Pac for cutting Hayes' hair tells you just how much heat Hayes and how prevalent the he deserved it sentiment is. What did Michael Hayes do that caused everybody to basically hate that man to the degree that nobody cared when he got his hair cut? So anyways, I don't know. I kind of feel like so much matters with how that information is obtained by people in general, who then can either choose to kick up a storm or not. And then that reflects on the person who's the subject of that particular shitstorm. This just doesn't seem like it really sort of underplays a lot of the stuff that seemingly was going on that plane flight. And on top of that, back in 2002, unless you're hopping in AOL chat rooms, there really wasn't much of a impactful social media to speak of. That really didn't come around for 15 years later or so. So I don't know. I just thought it was interesting. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Please try to be respectful. If you're going to be negative or toxic or victim blaming or any of that stuff, kindly don't leave a comment because I'm going to go through and hide you from the rest of the comments. Anyways, thanks everybody for watching. Go ahead and click on one of these other videos here. I appreciate it. Till next time, we'll talk to you later.